Nobody has a question, so go forward.
Well, then let's just move forward in looking at this overall picture of healing and what the process of healing looks like, and acquiring the skill of knowing your own structure, your own energy field, how it works, and if there are problems or challenges, what you need to do to face those challenges, and knowing what kind of professional help to turn toward when you need it. And the willingness to shift and change becomes a major part of that process. The last segment on this conversation, we talked about making your mind, your physiology, your nervous system life-friendly. And for most people, that means there are going to have to be changes made. And those changes are going to be, once again, for most people, pretty monumental. The fact that we have, most of us have been brought up in a world of so much hostility and fear. You just take a look at the culture today and what's going on. And obviously, the raging, the trauma, the separation is not very life-friendly. Henry Ford had an interesting quote, interesting thing that he used to say, and that was, if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And that's kind of the understatement of the century in our modern world, where the mind is, by and large, a very poorly misunderstood device. One thing that we do know about the mind is that, like the operation of a computer, if the inputs, such as the internet connection, the modem, keyboard, are faulty, every functioning computer will be unstable. And so it is with the human mind and body. Its inputs, when optimized, empower one to living a fulfilled life. If you go back to Yeshua and they asked him what was most important in the law, what we find is a nonsensical answer in the Greek interpretation of his words. Nonsensical relative to what he said. We're told that we're supposed to do some kind of an action toward the Creator and our neighbors that is impossible to do. That is, we're told we're supposed to love the Creator and we're supposed to love our neighbors, as though love is a verb. When you say, what's most important to do, talking about a verb. And love is not a verb, it's a noun. It describes who we are. It describes the energy that's designed to fuel our physiology, designed to fuel our minds. And if one doesn't know that, then one is likely or liable to lapse into periods of hostility, fear, rage, guilt, grief, drama, and trauma, being the energy that is flowing through their structures, and they're trying to live an optimized human life. It's pretty tough to do. If traumatized family and community systems are the controlling dynamics in the nervous system, if that's what's formulated in our nervous system, then the mind's true function often goes totally unrecognized or ignored. And, if I look back over the last 50 years of developing what we're engaged in here, for me, I've come to realize that the functioning and healing of the human mind, body, and nervous system is a fully, completely, totally understandable system if one understands how the system operates. And one of the first things in order to establish sense and truth in the system is the ability to honor truth. And yet, most people in our culture, whenever something is distasteful to them, instead of honoring truth and saying to themselves, well, here I am doing this to myself again, what most people step into is a conversation about, look what somebody else is doing to me. And so in honoring truth, if one's in some sort of pain or turmoil, the courage to challenge false beliefs is an absolute requirement to open to new possibilities. Otherwise, one will tend to live in the generational dynamics. You remember they said in the ancient scriptures, and remember that this word sin simply means an energy that's off the mark. The sins of the fathers will be passed, yea, unto 3 and 4 generations. The habitual patterns that are established by the generations who went before us will tend to run our lives. And so looking to correct those dynamics becomes part of the work that we're working to establish here and make available literally to every mind, heart, and being on the planet. You know, it's unfortunate that we have 2 different words in our culture, and it leaves confusion and leaves one void of truth. 2 words that represent a particularly singular object. We've been taught that the mind is one thing and the body is another, and that's false information based on ignorance. The word mind and body represent exactly the same singular experience. The only difference is the perspective from which we're looking. Imagine I place in your hand a $100 gold coin. You might say the coin has a head and a tail, but does it really? Call it that when we look at 2 different perspectives. But can you separate the head from the tail? Is there a head and a tail, or is it just a coin and we're looking at it from 2 perspectives? If I can't peel the head off of the coin and leave only the tail, which is impossible, then obviously we've been tricked. And if we've been tricked into thinking mind and body are 2 different things, then we're never going to arrive at truth. So that's one of the first things that we're going to have to clean up in our minds and recognize it in the same way as I look at the head of a coin, I'm looking at one side of a singular object, and when I look at the tail of the coin, I'm looking at the other side of this singular object. And so it is with this body-mind unit. And recognizing that whatever happens in the mind happens in the body. You can't do rage and blame and drama and trauma and pretend you're doing it to somebody else. I mean, you may be pounding on somebody else, but you get the original, they get the carbon copy. And if you've been taught that the mind's a separate thing from the body, it doesn't matter what you do there. I mean, so you rage, so what? Well, all rage is a self-attack on one's own body. If you want health, you can't live there. And so the tool that we're offering to people, and you know, one of the most common drugs, aside from busyness, rage is probably the most common drug on the planet. And people think that rage or hostility, anger is an emotion, and it's not. It's really just an internally produced anesthetic. It's a drug. And this understanding is going to have to be integrated, and one is going to have to give up assaulting themselves every time that they want to blame somebody else for what's going on in their lives. Because you can't assault yourself continuously with hostility and fear and tell the doctor, well, you know, or tell your neighbor that they're the problem in your life. Recognizing truth, honoring truth, and being able to give up the energetic patterns that keep us separated from truth becomes a key part in the healing process. And unfortunately, you know, when somebody is quote unquote sick, treatment generally comes with all kinds of toxic side effects and rarely has anything to do with actual healing. You know, any treatment that creates a toxic side effect It's a disease-causing agent that's disguised as a cure. They call them drugs. It's interesting, if you look in the PubMed, go to PubMed.com and define the word pharmacy, and it means to charm, to enchant. Magic, charm, cure, potion, medicine, pharmaco. Now, I'm not saying don't ever use a drug. There's no question. There is a powerful place for drugs in the treatment of those whose energy systems are out of harmony and are reflecting what's called disease. But recognizing that treatment, especially if it comes with toxic side effects, is not about healing. Yes, it's about trying to eradicate symptoms, but eradicating symptoms at the cost of the well-being of the energy system is not a healing thing to engage in. George Bernard Shaw had an interesting statement that he made. He said, be aware of false knowledge. It is more dangerous than ignorance. In the computer world, faulty inputs are labeled as corrupt data. And if not corrected, everybody knows the computer's going to fail. It's not going to complete its task successfully. And in exactly the same way, a highly functioning, reliable mind, body, nervous system, and we could just put a dash between those, recognizing that they are one and the same, just perspectives on the same thing. To be highly functional, there has to be an understanding of how the process of integrating those perspectives works together, and the ability to remove the energetic patterns that would interfere with any aspect of proper function. And somehow people have been taught that, with false definitions of success, somebody who's really good at the money game has millions of dollars, say, well, out there is a successful person. But if one thinks they can produce ascendancy in life without addressing incoherence within themselves, just because they can accumulate a lot of money, you'll notice there are many examples around of the misery that creates. Saying that John D. Rockefeller, in the last years of his life, said that he would gladly, apparently he was very traumatized with digestive problems, and he said he would gladly give his whole fortune just to be able to sit down at a dinner table and eat one more meal in peace. So if there are incoherent energies within the system, and this genius of this man Yeshua 2,000 years ago that basically showed how to remove those incoherent energies. And the process, the master process, the thing that made him the master physician was he knew how to show people, had the technology of how to remove incoherent energy from the system. And it doesn't have to do with taking a pill. So the fantasy of living in an unhealed, fearful, hostile mind, body, nervous system and expecting high-level outcomes is quite a fantasy. How can one expect high-level outcomes in the presence of internal, defective, corrupt data? Never happened. It's never going to happen. And the person who prays and hopes beyond hope that will happen, you will notice, is always worshiping at the altar of the universal one world religion of blame, guilt, victimhood. And it will always be someone else's fault. There's only one cause of pain within the human system. There's only one cause of suffering and failure, and that's a faulty input, corrupt data in the human system. Unfortunately, rage, conflict, and relationship failure is so common today that it's thought of as, well, it's just natural, it's just part of the way it works. It's not natural. It's not natural to have what today are called failed relationships. What, 60% or so of marriages end in divorce? It's become the norm for so many, but it's not natural. And sadly, it seems unavoidable. But failure in any aspect of life is anything but natural, even though it's become the norm. You know, like the computer, high levels of success are a result of reliable data processed through a solid functional device. You'll never hear a computer degrade itself, which would be the result of corrupt data, but how many people have you heard degrade themselves and wonder why this is happening to them again? And the why is this happening to me again process is really, why are they doing this to me again for most people? And blockage of truth, the inability to honor truth, becomes the first step in self-destruction. So the words innocent and victim are an oxymoron, and giving up blame is one of the first steps to being able to heal. Now, does that mean there aren't people who are cooperating and creating problems in your life? Oh, no. We are creators. We'll get to attract. We'll get to resonate in whoever, whatever we need to show us what it is we need to deal with. But those conflicts in the mind that's experiencing, or the body that's experiencing those conflicts, are always a result of functioning out of hidden corrupt data. And results are never just the luck of the draw. So anything based in fear and or hostility corrupts the functioning of the human mind, body, and nervous system. And to verify this for yourself, just notice that anytime, look over any time in your life when you find that you've done something that you regretted. That later said, oh, why did I do that? Notice what the energy was behind that regret. What motivated you to do what it is that you now regret? And it's always some form of hostility or fear. And when hostility or fear goes unaddressed in a relationship, a family, a community, a nation, between nations, it's 100% predictable that people are going to suffer and lives are going to be destroyed. Interesting, Warren Buffett, multi-billionaire, says the most important investment you can make is in yourself. And that means to dedicate some percentage of your time, your intelligence, your money, and your energy into your own self-healing. Principle that's been recognized for thousands of years, one that many people want to deny because of the work they need to do around this principle, informs us that one's initial relationships must be secure, to be highly functioning, and have a highly reliable body-mind unit. And in many cases, we need new definitions. We've all heard about the billionaire whose marriage has failed, children commit suicide, and yet the world says, oh, they were very successful. It's a poor definition of success. So it takes the most extreme self-deception to believe that the billionaire is success when their personal lives are falling apart. If there was damage inflicted on one in their early life and they were alone, painful experience, or let me rephrase that. Experiences that are unpleasant physiologically, mentally, and emotionally happen to everyone. But they become traumas when those experiences are happened without the support of active present love, the active present love of oneself or another. If there has been damage done in one's early life, then generational traumas are going to have to be faced and healed. And that healing process becomes the starting point for true joy and a stable, fulfilled life. And sadly, the ignorant would rather blame somebody else by hiding those opportunities, wondering why their lives are scarred repeatedly by family conflict, unhappiness, physical strain, shutdown, illness, alcohol, drug abuse, overeating, financial failure, whatever it is. And to recognize once again, and this to me is one that cannot be acknowledged too often, is that this man Yeshua, 2,000 years ago, brought a technology of forgiveness to earth that has been virtually disappeared globally for thousands of years. Our work here is to restore that most powerful corrective tool called forgiveness. Unresolved ancient inputs, including generational traumas, skeletons hidden in the family closet, inevitably, sooner or later, create an influence in the body-mind unit, and usually at the most important and most inopportune moments of life. Again, you've heard me utilize this quote many, many times from Carl Jung, so powerful. Until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. Oh yeah, well, life just did it to me. No. The dynamic is in your own unconscious. You must become acquainted with your own unconscious. Go back into the ancient scriptures. I think I mentioned this yesterday, but again, this can't be said too often. What did they say? Take care of the heart, which would be the word unconscious in our modern language. Take care of your own unconscious, for out of it are the issues in life. Now, the mind of man, what we call the mind of man, what's been brainwashed by the cultural dynamic, is no, the problem in my life doesn't come from my unconscious, it comes from that guy over there. So the primary keys to freeing the mind-body of its past inflicted physical, mental, or emotional traumas is to reset and reopen the energy flow in the mind-body so that it becomes available to, becomes attuned to, and receptive to joy, well-being, and aliveness. And there is a protocol for achieving that. And the whole foundation, the whole basis of this work is that protocol. And understanding how to express and explain that protocol in every conceptual language possible, whether it's physics, whether it's physiology, whether it's psychology, whether it's genetics, to me is the key study that we each need to engage if we're going to be able to embody it in our own lives. And it's interesting, you go back to the scriptures and, we're told, again, they asked Yeshua, what's most important in the law? He says, have Rakhma. You've got to have this condition active in your mind. That's first and foremost. And you have to keep that condition when you think of the Creator, when you think of neighbor, or when you think of self. And then standard exists for, anybody in the plant you think about. The word neighbor in Aramaic means it's a mental word. It's not a physical word in Aramaic. And it means anybody that you think about. But then there's one group of people that there's a higher standard for. And if there was trauma in relationship to this one group of people, these are the last people that most want to make amends with. These are the last people that most people want to face or deal with. Because of the, I think, most deeply because of the generational aspect of this particular relationship. But it impacts everything to do with one's mindset and physiological responses. And that is, what was that one group of people that was different than holding Rakhma for? In Aramaic, Rakhma being a filter, a gateway in the frontal lobes of the brain that brings active love into human form, our human lives into our human form, and keeps our minds on track with that love. What was that group of people? It was the source of one's first inputs, one's first authority. Who is that? Parents, or whoever served as parents. And I've seen people go through such trauma trying to even fathom resolving that parental relationship within themselves. I remember one man in particular was at HeartLand several years ago, and he was a very accomplished military man. But when it came to facing and even conceiving of holding to active present love in relationship to his mother, he would literally go berserk. And it was a relationship that time after time after time after time, I worked with him on coming back around to that relationship. And some of you may have been at this particular intensive where this gentleman did a Stillpoint breathing process and touched into the crux, the core memory that left him unable to even fathom anything to do with holding love present for his mother. And when he touched into that memory, into that experience, and this is a tough military guy, I mean, really tough. Could have tied both his hands behind his back and he could have taken me apart in a heartbeat. But he could not even have the memory that he touched into. In that Stillpoint session. And until the space becomes safe enough, those experiences where love was not present resolve until the truth of them is allowed to surface in the presence of love. Now, if one's physiological condition is tense, restriction of blood and energy flow, that impacts health in a myriad of ways. Because the mind-body unit, nervous system, cannot tell the difference between a real or an imagined experience. If a past, unresolved, especially dramatically or generationally traumatic experiences triggered into activity, our biology does its best to relieve itself. Nervousness, sweaty palms, short quickening of the breath, breath stopping, gut pain, hot flashes, headaches, back pain, can all be part of that experience. And, you know, if the cognitive part of the brain re-experiences that trauma, at the same time, it's called a flashback. You know, just kind of check it out. If you've ever felt fear kind of hit you in the gut, you ever gone off in a fit of rage, notice what you have to do to your mind, body, to express those corrupted and corrupting energies. You know, and medically, the physical condition we're talking about there is called sympathetic dominance. When one goes into sympathetic dominance, blood flow is shunted away from the higher centers of the brain. You don't need to do a calculus problem if a bear is chasing you in the woods. You need all the blood flow to your muscles, the muscles that enable you to run and to fight. And you need the lungs to open up to be able to get a higher blood flow so that you can carry oxygen to those muscles to enable you to run or fight. So the first thing to go is the higher centers of the brain. You watch and you look at someone who, you know, maybe someone that you know well, and all of a sudden they are functioning, and it's so bizarre, and you say, what is going on? What are you doing? And there's no capacity to even intelligently converse about what's going on. It's been called in the culture the fear, fright, flight, or freeze response. Freeze or actually fawning response. You know, the person who has to please whoever's present at every moment. Oh yes, of course, in agreement against their own best interest is in a state of sympathetic dominance called fawning. When that happens, the blood flow is shunted away from all of the non-critical functions of the body-mind unit. Like, for instance, you know, again, think of sympathetic dominance, bears chasing you in the woods. Do you need for reproduction to happen? Do you need to be building new red blood cells? Do you need to digest food? Do you need elimination? All of those functions, do you need to be able to put your head down and rest? No, and it's called the rest digest parasympathetic nervous system. And that's shut down, and if that becomes chronic, then the blood pathways to those other functions over time, if it's chronic, over time become blocked. And it's urgent to understand the impact of that and how to reset and heal the biological responses of repeating hostility, fear, pain, and trauma. In the matter of re-experiencing trauma, time is irrelevant. It doesn't matter how long ago it occurred. It doesn't matter whether it was in your lifetime or not. If it's in your genes and it has resonated into activity, then people will go, I don't know what happened, and just bang, there it was. And research is showing that generational assaults are included in this process. And the nervous system will replay those energetic patterns when an event or something as simple as a thought resonates them into activity. And if a mind's internal set, again, what was the set? Yeshua said was most important to human life. Rakhma has to be set. But if its internal set, if its inputs and defaults, its underlying unconscious attitudes are based in trauma and insecurity, life and relationships become a struggle, health becomes a challenge, and the projection of unresolved pain interferes with everything one touches. You know, it's kind of like the reverse of the Midas touch. And it's important to recognize that all of these dynamics are healable. Doesn't matter what it looks like. Now, usually, though not always, the power person dynamic is at the core of these repeating experiences. And the power person is someone who, at the moment of trauma being inflicted on one, was not functioning as love, had more control over the child. It's usually a child and a parent, although not always. If these three conditions are fulfilled, then one will tend to take on a power person dynamic, no matter what age or stage they're at in their lives, and no matter who it is that's present. But one person, again, usually the parent, has more power over the child than the child has. Two, the parent is not functioning as a human being, is not functioning out of love. There's some form of hostility or fear. And three, when the child perceives that circumstance, that situation as survival, then those three conditions cause literally the energy field of the child to open, wide open, until they're just like a learning sponge. They're literally going to take, and this is for survival's sake, they're going to take every energy from the environment into their structure with no reserve, with no hold, no block, no filtering. All of those energetic dynamics are simply inflicted on the system that's wide open. And so one becomes like a sponge. And even if, let's say in the case of something like a raging parent, even if the parent did not say a word, the energy of rage is still absorbed into the system of the child, and whenever it is resonated in the future, rage is going to be the foundation of the output of the mind, until one steps in and forgives that dynamic, that energy. And forgiveness meaning removal, not letting somebody else off the hook for it. When you really look at forgiveness, you can understand with the amount of denial, systematically within our culture, you can easily understand why people thought forgiveness was about, of course, some Bill's to blame, Harry's to blame, Mary's to blame, Hortense is to blame, so I'll forgive Hortense, Harry, or Mary. Rather than, here I am in the presence of Bill, Mary, Harry, or Hortense, and I've got a lot of trauma going on. I think I'll forgive. I think I'll go inside myself and remove my trauma. And that's the act of forgiveness in Aramaic. And unresolved parental and generational relationship issues almost invariably are at the root of potentially bizarre, controlling power person dynamics and abuse. Have you ever said to yourself, having done a particular behavior and found it abhorrent, well, I'm never going to do that again, or I'll never be like them, and then find yourself repeating the very behavior that you hated most? And in many cases, it happens right down to the very word patterns of the power person. In those kind of stressful situations, oftentimes a person will actually literally speak the words of the power person, and it will be in their voice, whether they say it out loud or in their heads. It'll be in their voice, but it will actually be the voice of the power person. So people will actually repeat the verbatim word patterns of their power person. So if one is unconscious of what is going on under the surface, the inputs that are there, one finds oneself perceiving life, especially when under stress, both unwittingly and unwillingly through the lens of that power person abuser. And the corrupt content of memories from that past are weaved into, massaged into the perceptions of the moment, so that the mind in denial, these dynamics are massaged into looking like, this is Bill's fault. See, I have this picture of Bill in my mind, but if one is acquainted with their own unconscious dynamics and recognizing that what they're feeling in their physiology is theirs, and they're blaming Bill, they will take those dynamics unresolved within their own physiology, unresolved within their own unconscious, and build pictures of Bill. And they'll see Bill made out of the very energy that they're traumatized by, that they're carrying around and in denial of. Remembering that denial is the act of thinking or speaking as though something outside of us is the cause of what's moving inside of us. So anything that's moving in the unconscious, clear the heart, for out of it are the issues in life, or the desert is another word for it, are weaved into the perceptual constructs of the mind of the moment. And if you don't know that's true, then you don't know enough to collapse those false pictures and access what's underneath them. And that was the genius piece of information that Yeshua brought to the earth 2,000 years ago. Here's how you access and remove those dynamics. You know, the ancients cautioned, look to the lives of the fathers, and of course, by implication, the mothers, for ours is but a shadow of theirs upon the earth. They also informed us, those who understood how this mind worked, that there was a peculiar, poorly understood problem with the human mind. And the way it was stated was, we see as though through a glass darkly. And it's interesting, if you look at that word darkly, the way it's translated from the Greek, the word is actually enigma, something that's mysterious, puzzling, or difficult to understand. So, you know, really, when you look into the depth of that, you realize that 2,000 years ago, they really understood the difficulty of working through the convoluted functioning of the traumatized human mind and body. And of course, if one never acquires the tools or the skills, and they happen to form a group of people, bring a group of people together to start to look at these convoluted functionings of the mind, then all kinds of crazy beliefs become part of one's process, and they turn it into a religion. If one has not been taught, or were falsely taught, what perception, the output of the human mind is, the output of the human nervous system, the output of the human body, remember they're all one and the same, and what emotions and traumas do to distort the output of the mind, the inputs being distorted, the output is going to be distorted. You know, challenge and difficulty is sure to follow. And the word enigma we see is though through an enigma, a convoluted, confused mind appropriately describes what it takes to move through deep healing on one's own. That's why it's always been said, support's needed. The ability to comprehend this, to build the brain cells for this, while living out of a mind that's in sympathetic dominance and perceives everything through trauma, it's right up there with next to impossible. That's one of the reasons we're doing this radio show, is to assist people to build the brain cells so they can access the only real teacher in the universe, which is inside of them. Now, many people will say they listen to that whole, thought structure and say, well, I'm smarter than that. Alfred, it doesn't matter how smart you are. Without a knowledge of the source of your perceptions, of what perception is created or how to correct it, and the trauma behind it, the trauma it contains, how to go to it at its root and clean it up, the output of the mind, we see so through a glass darkly, is truly mysterious, puzzling, and difficult to understand. some of it is downright shocking when you first learn about it. And many will say, oh, not possible, when they first confront the truth of what's going on in their own minds. There's several things that have been hidden from us about perception. These things are urgent to understand and apply if you want to clean up your life and free yourself of victimhood and blame. So some of the basic principles are: 1, perception is just a construct of the mind. That's all it is. The world you think you see, the world to your eyes give you the fake story that you're looking at something out there. Perception is a construct of the mind. There's an interesting quote you've heard me use before from the CIA. They did research on human intelligence and verified this rather shocking but true conclusion. And here's how they said it, quote, in their book, you can download it from our website: perception is a demonstrably active rather than passive process. It constructs rather than records reality. Perception, they say, is a process of inference in which people construct their own version of reality on the basis of information provided through the senses. Your mind, based on its content and inputs, literally constructs the world you see. Once again, your mind, based on its content and its inputs, literally constructs the world you see. All perception, including sensations in the so-called body, are autobiographical. Many misinterpreted signals have destroyed life after life after life. Everything your mind shows you is autobiographical. Everything your mind shows you tells you first and foremost about the content of your mind. Is what your mind's showing you true about what's going on out there? It might be. It might be, but you can't tell by the fact that your mind is showing to you whether it's true about what's going on out there. But you can always tell 100% of the time that it's true about what's going on in here. So, second principle, perception is a mental construct generated by the mind-body unit. If you want to get a really good bird's eye view of that, go to YouTube and search for a TED Talk by Anil Seth, A-N-I-L-S-E-T-H. He's a professor of cognitive and computational neuroscience at the University of Sussex, England, and here's what he says. The world we think we see is an hallucination. And it's unique to each person. And when we agree on our shared hallucinations, we call it reality. That's the conclusion that Neil Seth demonstrates. And actuality, this is a quote from Michael Rice, actuality is what is. Reality is nothing more than a construct of the mind that gives meaning to that actuality. The thing to recognize is that if the actuality is pain, then correction is needed. Pardon me, if the reality is pain-filled. Then correction is needed. Correction comes through forgiveness. Another principle to understand comes out of the mouth of Jonas Salk, Salk Institute, the man who created the Salk vaccine. We live in the past, he says, and our brain makes up for it. Measurements performed in the act of perceiving show us, he says, that everything perceived through the body-mind unit is from the past. There's a delay of about 70 thousandths of a second. They've measured it from the time our eyes receive information to the time our brain completes the generation of our reality. It takes time for the body-mind unit to convert data into pictures. So when a circumstance happens, resonates data, and the functioning purpose of the mind, one person said, is to make up a story to make the data make sense. And this whole thing is based on content, the inputs, and the alignment of the outputs with truth. Next principle, principle 4 to understand, is perception controls your biology. The moment you change your perception is the moment you rewrite the chemistry of your body-mind unit. That comes right from the mouth of Dr. Bruce Lipton, a cell biologist. We could take another step from what Bruce Lipton has done, and that's that perception is your biology, and your biology is your perception. What happens in your mind is happening in your body. What happens in your body is happening in your mind. And each is a perspective of a singular event. He said it this way: we become mad and delirious, and fears and terrors assail us. All of these things we endure from the brain. You want to collapse those types of terrors and remove them? You can't do it while you're blaming somebody else for them. Principle: energetic patterns and responses to trauma under circumstances yet to be fully determined is passed from generation to generation. We don't know what all the mechanisms are, except to recognize that from an energetic perspective, every energy that we experience is stored holographically in every cell in our structure and passed on from generation to generations. They've done a lot of research with Holocaust survivors, and they find that the offspring of those who went through the Holocaust before those children were conceived have totally and completely different energetic functioning than those whose parents were not involved in the Holocaust. The Guardian newspaper has an interesting, you've seen if you want to search for that one on the internet. So search for the Guardian study of Holocaust survivors' trauma passed on to children. So if you want to do a search for that, again, theguardian.com is the publisher of an interesting article and study of Holocaust survivors and trauma passed through the genes. And once again, there's this primo technology, which was developed over 2,000 years ago, with which you can collapse perception. You can collapse the whole trauma-based output of that system, wherever the trauma is, whether it's from the inputs, whether it's from content, whatever the root is, that construct can be collapsed. And when it's collapsed, the underlying dynamics become available and correctable. And once again, the technology is called forgiveness. And at its root, it's been totally mistranslated and destroyed by our modern culture. Now, the world says, oh, you need to forgive them for what's going on inside of you. Why do I need to let you off the hook for what's showing up as pain perception in my mind? But I'll believe that if I was brought up in the one world universal religion of blame, which is virtually universal, literally universal today. So there's no need to ever forgive. In fact, very clear direction. Never, ever, ever forgive anyone for anything. There is an act of pardoning which can be very beneficial. Sometimes people do crazy things and are involved in triggering trauma within you. And so if you choose to pardon someone, if you choose to let someone off the hook because they did something that was out of line with truth and with being honorable, that can be a wonderful thing to do. But if they're doing something out of line with truth and something less than honorable resonates pain in you, they're two separate issues. Mind combines them into one. Oh, look what they did to me. They're the cause of my pain. So if I choose to pardon someone, great. Then when I'm finished pardoning, then I'm going to apply the forgiveness to the trauma energy that's locked into me. So first century Aramaic forgiveness is how one can reliably, consistently, and persistently remove disintegrative content from within. It's a reliable way to change physiology, to heal trauma, to rewrite genes, and thereby change the content of the body, mind, nervous system. And for most, until that's done, they don't live in a world that even exists except as a picture between their ears. And that world will be passed on to future generations. And you know, the ease of changing this body, mind, nervous system's content is really quite surprising once one has the brain cells to recognize and to use the technology. Henry David Thoreau said a lot of things that were pretty brilliant, and one of them that applies in this particular context, he said, it's not what you look at that matters, it's what you see. What you perceive, and perception, again, is a construct of mind. Nias Nin, philosopher, said, we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And I'll add that since all perception, all appearances in the mind come from within, pain perception is always a projection. You might remember the ancient warning that said, do not judge by appearances. All perception is an appearance. All perception is a reflection of data stored in and impacting the body, mind, nervous system. When all energies, physical, emotional, mental, genetic, are firmly grounded in truth, accuracy of our internal guidance system, perception, will be restored. That's the objective of this work. Once again, perception is a reflection of data stored in and impacting the mind, the body, and the nervous system. When all energies, whether physical, emotional, mental, genetic, are firmly grounded in truth, accuracy of our internal guidance system, perception, will be restored. And as fear and hostility-based perceptions are uprooted and corrupt data is removed, forgiven, then pain, regrets, disturbances simply disappear. And our natural state of serenity is restored. And once healing falls into place, everything else in the mind comes as it was designed to be. And I wasn't keeping track of time, but I just got notification from the show that our hour is up. So I'm going to say thank you for joining us. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. In the meantime, make the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the